Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. Hope everybody is off to a great start with this July. This is a holiday week. We got the 4th coming up on Thursday. I hope you have something special planned for it with your family, friends, wherever it takes you the holiday this year. We have some travel going on at our site. We're going to come to you with just this one podcast this week. So we hope you do enjoy it. We're going to pack a lot into it. We have got more recruiting conversation coming up with Tyler Calvaruso. Penn State picked up yet another commitment. It was a hell of a June for them. We're going to break down the commitment spree that they experienced, adding 9 players to the 2025 recruiting class. They also tacked on a 4-star quarterback from Southern California to their 2026 recruiting class. We'll go through some of the peaks and valleys of this month of June and the fireworks that happened with Tyler Calvaruso for some highlights. And we'll also take a closer look at Jeff Exinor Jr., the wide receiver from Maryland who hopped on board with this class, the latest commitment that came through on Friday evening. A little bit later here in this episode, Daniel Gallen will rejoin us. If you missed our last episode of this podcast, we spent a significant amount of time breaking down our expectations for Penn State's offensive depth chart as it prepares for preseason camp at the start of August, just a month away now. We're going to shift over to the defensive side of the football. There's a new position in play to look at. There's a lot of movement in terms of guys moving to different position and guys rising up the ranks as a year older. So Daniel and I will work our way through position by position on the defensive depth chart a little bit later. But as promised, here is Tyler Calvaruso. Was a busy man for us during the month of June. We get him back here. Hopefully get to take a deep breath at the start of July, look back a little bit at what went down in the last month. So, Tyler, as I said, last time we had you on, killer work in the month of June. We kind of hit the reset button here in July. It's a different part of the recruiting calendar, and we made it through June. It's in the books officially.
Yeah, different part of the recruiting calendar, but still plenty busy of a time, which is good. We've got some commitments coming down the pipeline, plenty to reflect upon June when it comes to Penn State's recruiting efforts in the 25 class and even the 26 class moving forward. So we're in a dead period, but it's never dead.
Yeah, you mentioned pipeline. I'm going to seize on that and go over to the McDonough School down in Maryland. We've talked about it a bunch. Guys like Devon Elise, PJ Mustipher, Curtis Jacobs, denied Dennis Sutton. You've got the redshirt freshman now, Mason Robinson, working his way through at defensive end. A lot of history with this school. They bat 50%. They go 1 for 2 last week there, Tyler Calvaruso. Brandon Finney, the top cornerback target, ends up picking Oregon last week. But then Friday evening, Jeff Exinor Jr., 4-star wide receiver, guy who's long been on the Penn State target board. We've discussed him quite a bit. He does indeed go with the Nittany Lions after taking one long look at nearby Maryland.
Maryland definitely gave him a lot to think about during his official visit, but I said it last week, just given the relationship that Exner had with Kenny Sanders and the Penn State staff, it continued to feel like a tough one where you could envision Penn State losing it, and that wound up not happening. Marcus Higgins comes in and seals the deal on a guy who has been one of his top names on the wide receiver board really for an extended period of time now. Exner's involvement with Penn State even predates his time as a wide receiver prospect. There was a point where it looked like he was going to be an edge rusher at the next level, but he grows into a wide receiver frame, highly productive player for McDonough at that position, and Penn State closes on another one of its top targets. And I like the skill set here on Exner. I got the chance to see him in Baltimore in May during Under Armour camp, and I like the floor, especially. I think Exner is a very high floor player. Physically, he's already ready to roll. I mean, he has a Big Ten body already. He's mentioned to me potentially shedding a little bit of weight and playing a little bit lighter to add some speed at the next level. But either way, physically, Exner is where he needs to be. He's got good hands. He's got a diverse route tree. He's got scheme versatility. He can line up on the outside, line up on the inside. So there's a lot to like about this kid if you're a Penn State fan.
Exner, we've got him listed at 6'2", 220 pounds at 24/7 Sports. He is the number 10 athlete nationally in 24/7 Sports rankings with a 4-star rating, and he is the number 6 player in the state of Maryland. And so when we look at the recruitment and the relationships that were in play here, you've talked about them in the past. How ultimately was Penn State able to, stiff arm that late push from the Terps to try to get him to stick and build something closer to home and ultimately bring him on board as the 20th member of this 2025 class?
There are two parts of it. The relationships, definitely being important. Kenny Sanders and his, they go way back, so that's well documented at this point for our listeners. And the relationship with Higgins has developed into a pretty good place. The relationship with James Franklin has been in a good place since Exinor was an underclassman. The other aspect which I really helped Penn State to get it done was the schematic aspect of its pitch. You know, what Andy Kotelnicki had to say to him about getting him the ball in a multitude of ways in Penn State's offense. That really appealed to Exinor in his camp. And our guy Brian Doan, he had a great piece on this right after Exinor's commitment on why Kansas's tape and the film that Kansas put out on offense during the 2023 season, when it boasted a really, really explosive offense with Kotelnicki at the helm, how that helped to get Exinor on board. It helped him to visualize his potential part in Penn State's offense and given his strengths and how he can impact the game in a couple of different ways, given what he does well as a pass catcher. So I'd say the relationships and really just the scheme fit worked heavily in Penn State's favor here and helped Penn State to really fend off Maryland in the end. You know, Virginia Tech made a strong push for Exinor when he got him on campus for an official visit in April. But as time went on, Penn State reinserted itself as the favorite. And then Maryland gave him something to think about. You know, Maryland did a good job, it seemed, in its schematic pitch in its own right, but Penn State's pitch wound up being better, and Exinor committed to the Nittany Lions.
I'm glad you brought up that piece from Brian Doan that was on our site over the weekend. Brian, of course, for those who listen, for those who don't, he is a national recruiting analyst with 24/7 Sports. Does a great job documenting so much of the inner workings of a lot of these recruitments. And he had a story on our site about Exinor sitting down with Kotelnicki. As Tyler mentioned, it wasn't just watching any Kansas tape from last year. They pinpointed Kansas tape against Oklahoma and against Texas, you know, the bad big boys of the Big 12 who have now since moved on to the SEC. And it seems like that spoke volumes in showing what he was able to do to get playmakers in space, regardless of who the competition is. And what we saw from Kansas last year was often, regardless of who's at quarterback, their ability to get the ball to their playmakers. And so an interesting way to get it done there, because Andy Kotelnicki, I don't think he's going to point to the blue-white game in Beaver Stadium as his proudest offensive cut-ups, because we're not going to see a lot in that circumstance. So right now you can understand why he's selling what he's accomplished in the past. And by the way, a reminder, he was named 24/7 Sports Offensive Coordinator of the Year for the plays he drew up in Kansas last fall. When it comes to Exinor, highly productive, as you said, that he settled in at the receiver spot as a recruit in that position. 64 catches last season as a junior, 900-plus yards, 11 touchdowns. And so he comes on board. He pairs up with Lyric Samuel to create a two-man class at receiver for now. Lyric Samuel out of New York, long-limbed wide receiver, rangier type body. I think he's about 30 pounds lighter than Jeff Exinor and probably an inch and a half taller. So they're very different pieces. How would you describe them as kind of complementary parts in the foundation of this receiver class that we do expect to grow?
Exinor is definitely more refined at this point in his development. I mentioned the high floor earlier. Samuel might have a higher ceiling. I think the upside there is pretty intriguing from Penn State's perspective. You know, he's still pretty raw as a receiver, but you see a lot of the traits that a high-level wideout possesses. His catch radius is really impressive. He's around 6'4", 180, so he's got the requisite length to be a vertical threat for Penn State lined up on the outside, and he's going to continue in his physical development. He has a frame that can still pack on some pounds, and he'll still be the same player. At least that's the thought process. So Samuel is definitely less of a finished product than Exinor at this point in his development, and they're both different prospects, which I'd say is a good thing for Penn State because you're not adding two of the same guys. You're adding both guys who can help your offense in different kind of ways. So I think right now, the state of the class, Marcus Higgins has done a good job this cycle getting those two on board. I think it's a good duo to start, and there's still more to come at the position.
Been a lot of positive news to talk about with Penn State on the recruiting trail. This pendulum's going to swing a little bit with our next piece to get to. Penn State had hoped to perhaps bookend this last weekend with big pickups at receiver, Exinor on Friday evening. And then you had Matthew Outten down in Virginia, top 200, top 24/7, in fact, the top 200 overall prospect down there at the receiver spot. And he made his announcement on Monday afternoon. He talked about Virginia Tech being in play for Exinor. They got it done without, he committed to the Hokies on Monday afternoon. So Penn State's one of those teams kind of left at the doorstep in that recruitment, perhaps the team left at the doorstep. How would you categorize this miss in terms of the ramifications for what they want to accomplish in this receiver cycle?
It's a loss, no doubt about it. You know, Outten was one of those guys who was pretty high on the board for Penn State. And it sounded good for the Nittany Lions coming out of their official visit earlier in June. But Virginia Tech got out and on campus during the last weekend of June, and the Hokies wound up surging, getting him on board. Penn State had reason for optimism. Even Maryland had a reason for optimism here with Outten, but he decides to stay in-state, suit up for Brent Pry and his staff in Blacksburg. I think that while it's definitely a loss, no doubt about it, I think the blow is softened by who is left on the board at wide receiver. When you look at some of the quality names still left on the board, I'm really high on all of those guys. I think we're talking about 4 guys who could go on to have really successful collegiate careers regardless of where they wind up. Lex Cyrus is the big one, the in-state speedster. It's coming down to Penn State, South Carolina for him. Kobe Howard's a name who continues to pop up in conversation. I think things are going to go a little bit slower with him from Penn State's side, but he's a talented wideout from Florida. Samari Reed, another Florida standout who's on the verge of a decision. Really talented guy. You guys got the chance to see him in 7-on-7 in State College last summer. Big-time vertical threat, really just kind of glides down the field with the way he moves. Kind of like Lyric Samuel in the sense that he has the requisite traits of a potential big-time vertical threat. And then Taz Williams, who has a case to maybe be the most exciting of the bunch, given his tape is him going out there on a weekly basis against some of the top competition in Texas and really just producing no matter what he has to do to get to that point. Route trees diverse, good hands, really, really tough kid. Every coach that we talked to about with Taz Williams praises his toughness and just his all the intangibles that you can't necessarily quantify or see on film. So Outten, it is what it is. You're going to take your losses in recruiting. I think every college football fan knows that. But given what is behind Outten on Penn State's wide receiver board, it's definitely not a sky is falling scenario, in my opinion.
I think as we were entering June and kind of navigating the scene at wide receiver, and it's changed a bit since then, certainly, the 2 names that you really paired together at the top of the board were Quincy Porter, who ultimately came off the target board going to Ohio State in their class last month, and then the man we just discussed, and Matthew Outten down in Virginia. When we look at how things are kind of resettling now with Exinor now in the class and these guys going elsewhere, you mentioned 4 guys there. In your personal view, you've had a chance to review some film, you've had a chance to see some of those in camp. Who would be the top of the board guy from that collection? I'm not trying to shortchange anybody, but when you say the prize among that realistic collection of commits, we're not just working our way through the receiver rankings at 24/7 Sports and picking out the top 5 guys on the list. We're working through realistic options right now here in July of 2024. Who do you think is the premier member of that group?
It's Lex Cyrus. I mean, the speed is elite. What really impresses me about Cyrus is he's standing at 5'10", but his length for a guy that size is really, really impressive. Wingspan is where it needs to be, as almost, I believe it's 33-inch arms. So, I mean, when you have a guy at 5'10" with that kind of length, he has catch radius that a lot of guys his size simply do not have. And he's got the elite speed already. And it's not just speed with Cyrus either. There's so much talk about him being a track star, and sometimes track kids, they're not as refined as receivers because their game is simply speed. That's not the case with Lex Cyrus. He has a good release. I'd want to see more of him as a route runner. I think just because Susquehanna's offense is structured a certain way where they try to make use of his speed, that limits the route tree a little bit. But man, his fluidity, I think he's going to continue to develop as a route runner. He's got good hands. I've seen that since last summer. So there's a lot to like with Cyrus. I think the guy who gives him probably the closest run for his money would be Taz Williams, kind of for the reasons I outlined. Just does a little bit of everything for you at wide receiver, and he does a little bit of everything pretty well. So for me, it's Cyrus, but Taz Williams very much in that conversation as well. And I do love Samari Reed, too. I think he's got big-time potential as an outside threat.
I told you a little bit of Jahan Dotson to Lex Cyrus's game when we saw him a couple of weeks ago during that 7-on-7 tournament. There's just a smoothness to him and there's a layer there that I know that Jahan didn't have the track speed, but when you watch him just kind of work his way downfield, seems to find a way to find space, seems to find a way to ditch the defender, and it just seems natural out there. And I remember that really standing out with Jahan Dotson. when he was a guy who at the high school level wasn't producing, tremendous 40-yard dash times. And, oh, by the way, he ended up doing that by the time he was done with Penn State, ended up being a first-round pick. But Williams, to me, it kind of very, you categorize him differently because he's got we've gotten looks at him not just from the junior film, but he's put out some tape of what he's doing on the summer camp circuit. We've seen some of that. And I mean, the footwork in place here. I mean, I know that we were kind of all enamored by Tysier Denmark's workout videos of late and what we saw from him, shades of that in terms of a guy who's attacking defenders downfield with a lot of confidence right now and seems to have a lot of in his repertoire that he can use. And kind of on the other end with Lex Cyrus, not necessarily the verified burner results that maybe is that Penn State is coveting from its entire package at wide receiver. The speed is something that we've discussed with him, but the production was there last year in Texas. 80 catches, 1,200 yards, 14 touchdowns on the season as a junior. And as you said, it's not a bunch of scrub competition that he's facing with Red Oak. So with Taz Williams, I'm just going to throw this out here before we move on from the receiver spot. Felt like the good vibrations were there as he was heading out of Happy Valley. He went on the record with some strong comments about how he felt about that visit, how it impacted his recruitment. We're now a couple of weeks away from that. Are the warm and fuzzies still in place as far as you can tell? Have we moved on from that period a little bit and it's kind of resettled with Penn State duking it out with other schools? What's your read on where it is with Taz Williams now? Because he wants to make a July decision, correct?
Yeah, July 13th. We haven't really moved on from that. That positive buzz is still very much in place. Michigan and Texas A&M were involved pretty heavily throughout the summer and official visit season. It seems like things have kind of tailed off there. So right now, I'd say it's probably coming down to Penn State and SMU. SMU local option for Taz Williams. I know he's a Pittsburgh native and he's from PA, but the fact of the matter is he's down in Texas, so it is still a form of a local option for him. And we all know SMU could be competitive in the NIL field if it comes to that. So I'd say it's between those two right now. Still giving Penn State the edge. The buzz remains in Penn State's favor, and the intel remains pointing towards Penn State. So a lot can happen between now and the 13th. We've still got a little bit, about a week and a half before then. And, we've got some other dominoes to fall on the wide receiver board as well. But it sounds good for Penn State right now.
That's ACC newcomer SMU,
yes.
Out of the Dallas area. And I just will throw one more thing. I lied about that. One more thing for you at wide receiver. Do you think this class doubles when it's all said and done? Is this a 4-man class at the end of the day? In terms of your projection, 20 guys on board total in the recruiting cycle, 2 of them at wide receiver. And I'll just reemphasize the freshman class they brought into 2023 was a one-man show. It was Carmelo Taylor, and he's not with the program anymore. So you have the 3 current freshmen, and then you're trying to stack the next class on top of them.
Adding 2 more is definitely the goal. 4 is the number at wide receiver this cycle, I'd say. And we've touched on 4 talented guys, and with 4 being the number, really there are only 2 spots up for grabs. So they're going to be, Penn State's not just going to welcome everyone on board. They still in a position where they could, kind of formulate a pecking order. I'd say Williams and Cyrus are probably at the top of that order right now. They really like Samori Reed too. And Howard's interesting because, again, I think it's going to go a little bit longer with him. He's told me that he wants to make visits in the fall, and I think that Penn State's taking things with him a little bit slower than the other 3 guys. But 4 is the number. And I think the 4 that Penn State winds up with, this just really comes down to how highly I view these guys. I think the 4 that Hagens winds up with in the end will just be a solid group because you evaluate some of these guys and you look at their strengths, and it's kind of hard not to be impressed with what they bring to the table.
We've got a write-up at Lions247.com this week about an early evaluation of the current freshman receiver group, Josiah Brown, Tysier Denmark, Peter Gonzalez, with perspective from Penn State General Manager Andy Frank, Penn State receivers coach Marcus Hagens. You can check that out over at Lions247.com. Tyler, we're going to get to dive into the depth chart in a little while with Daniel Gallen and go position by position on defense. But I think we owe it to the month of June to check our rearview mirror now that we're in early July. 9 players were added to the 2025 recruiting class. It goes to a 20-man group all of a sudden. It's ranked 8th nationally in 24/7 Sports. Oh, by the way, Troy Hune, the top 24/7 quarterback from Southern California, joined Messiah Mickens to form a really impressive pair in that 2026 class early on. And when I look at the impact here, Tyler, it's pretty easy. I can go over to 247sports.com, click on Penn State's class. And as I scroll through, the top 5 guys in these ratings for the class have been added since June 10th. Darius Dixon, the cornerback out of Southern California, Jalen Woods, the edge rusher from Kansas, Max Granville, the edge rusher from Texas, Jameer Joseph, the cornerback from New Jersey, and the man we just spent a lot of time discussing at the top of the show, wide receiver Jeff Exinor Jr. from Maryland. So very much a transformational month for the recruiting class. It often is. That's why we hype up the month of June so much. I've got a few questions to throw your way regarding what we just witnessed, and we'll start with one that you could take in a lot of different directions considering the success. What was the most impressive recruiting win for Penn State in June 2024?
Man, there's so many. There's so many good ones to choose from here. I've got to go with, I think, Max Granville. Being able, I said this last week, for Deion Barnes to be able to go down to Texas and get his top guy on the board over programs like Oklahoma, which was involved with Granville for a really long time. Texas A&M, strong local option for him. USC was appealing to Granville as well. For Deion Barnes to go down to Texas and get that one done, that's probably, for me at least, and there have been plenty of impressive recruiting jobs here by Penn State this cycle, that's got to be the most impressive. I mean, Granville's a hell of a talent, but it just goes beyond that. Barnes put his big boy pants on to win that battle. There's no doubt about it. That was a big-time win for Penn State. It was a tough one. You know, he popped onto the board as a top target for Barnes and the staff really in the winter. And it put in so much effort to land him from that point on. And we've seen instances where Penn State goes outside of its traditional recruiting footprint, pours a ton of energy and effort into a recruitment, gets close, but the guy decides, hey, I'm going to just stay in my region. I want to stay a little bit closer to home. Not the case here. Penn State really pushed all the right buttons with Granville in its pitch. I mean, the developmental side of the pitch is really what sold Granville and his family. They feel Barnes is the guy that can develop him, get the best out of him, and get him to the next level. So out of the really impressive bunch, it's got to be Granville for me. I keep coming back to him, and I say, wow, Penn State got that one done. That's a hell of a job.
I knew you were going in that direction, and I'm in agreement with you. And I just have a strong feeling that a year from now, when we're talking about which freshman could make some noise in preseason camp, he's going to be one of the first names that we're reeling off just because of where he's going to be at when he gets here to campus and how I think he's going to take to the whole situation here in Happy Valley, what Penn State's going to throw his way. Exciting pickup. He's a top 200 guy. He was a coveted prospect, one of the more prized pass rushers in this cycle. Let's go a little bit more under the radar and talk about a recruiting win from June that maybe didn't warrant as much headlines, maybe didn't even warrant as much conversation here between us and the podcast, but that you think long-term is going to be a very important pickup for the program.
Antonio Branch, I think, is the guy who stands out to me in that regard. I think he's going to be a 4-star safety prospect when it's all said and done. I just really like the versatility of his skill set. He's got the coverage ability. He's definitely not shy when it comes to coming down and run support and laying the wood, making tackles. So I think Branch, with his frame, he's not the traditional Anthony Poindexter safety in the sense that he's around 6'2", 172. You know, he's not as bulky as some of the guys Penn State has landed at the position in the past. But I see the coverage ability for him to play essentially as a center fielder in one high looks. And then, you know, when he has to walk down, come into the box and make plays and run support, he can do that as well. Another thing with Branch is, again, outside praise. He just comes across as a leader. You know, this is going to be his first season at Miami Northwestern, and the praise from that staff has already been pretty high regarding Branch's leadership ability, kind of taking control of that defense pretty quickly upon arriving at the program. So there, again, another situation where we could have went a couple different ways, but for me, it's Branch. Tough call because there's a lot of guys who I think are kind of maybe flying under the radar a little bit. You know, Braswell Thomas was one, so there are definitely a bunch of candidates for that category.
Branch, number 37 right now at the safety position in 24/7 Sports Assessment. There's definitely a South Florida flavor right now in this Penn State class. You could see more of that to come as the 2025 cycle continues forward. Tyler, I'm going to throw a question to you with a two-parter here. Biggest surprise recruiting result for you from the month of June in Penn State for Penn State, and this means both good surprise, and I'm looking for also maybe a disappointing bad surprise for Nittany Lions fans.
Good surprise, probably the commitment of Darius Dixon. Yeah, anytime you can get a top 100 corner in your class, it's big time. But when you go out to the West Coast and get them coming off an official visit, I mean, that wasn't one that I necessarily saw coming as imminently as it came together. I mean, less than 24 hours after wrapping up the official visit, Dixon was part of Penn State's recruiting class. And I even speculated leading up to Dixon's visit, is he really going to leave the West Coast? I thought of the two California visitors that weekend, the other being the wide receiver, Phillip Bell, that Dixon was more likely to venture off the West Coast. But I thought he'd at least make it to Tennessee to check out the Vols for his official visit before doing that. So I didn't realize things were going to come together that quickly, really until Monday morning when we started to get feedback that, hey, look, Dixon's going to be getting into this class here. So that's my biggest surprise from a positive standpoint. I guess biggest negative surprise would probably be Brandon Finney to Oregon. That was one Penn State felt really good about for a long time, and Oregon kind of came in late, got that one done. Oregon, they tend to do that on the trail. They do a good job. They do a good job with their NIL. Dan Lanning and his staff do a good job of selling kids on their roles. Oregon's been on a run in recruiting for a pretty big time run here, really over the last 2 weeks. NIL has definitely played a big part in that, but it's also just that's a good staff out there in Eugene, and Penn State fans are going to get to know that here pretty soon with Oregon being in the Big Ten now. So that would probably be the biggest negative surprise there. And I don't even think Penn State's going to be done with Finney until he, signs on the dotted line with Oregon. So we'll be keeping an eye on that one moving forward.
And I'm sure Jeff Exinor Jr. will be keeping an eye on that one moving forward. Those guys are going to be getting in a preseason camp together, spending a lot of time together as McDonough school teammates down in Maryland. One picked Penn State this past week. The other picked Oregon. Still a while to go, though, 5.5 months or so until signing day here for the 2025 class. And toughest outcome of June. I guess this doesn't necessarily have to mean results that have already happened. There are recruits that have kind of moved on from Penn State during the month of June that entering this month that we thought the Nittany Lions would be in the mix for, if not landing a commitment from. So when you think about the toughest outcome for June for Penn State, we've talked about a lot of good. We got to balance it out a little bit here. Where do you land?
I mean, not to keep talking about Finney, but I feel like it's got to be that in this category too. Just given his placement on the board, his skill set, and the upside that he possesses, he's not a finished product at cornerback just yet, right? We're not talking about a guy who's going to come in from year one and have that Big Ten ready skill set. He's still developing, but he's got elite athleticism, elite speed, and he has all of the tools that Terry Smith has coached up out of guys in the past, and he has sent those guys off to the NFL. Finney could have been next, and hey, look, maybe he even still is next, depending on how things play out in the coming months. Like I said, Penn State's not going to go away in that recruitment for a bunch of reasons that, go beyond Finney's talent too. McDonough, so you've got the ties there, and the relationships with Finney are in a really good place, even though he went off to Oregon. So that's got to be the toughest outcome, just given who Finney is as a prospect, his prospect profile, the high school he comes from. Again, I hate to keep harping on him because we like to switch it up a little bit when we do these, make it more fun. But it's got to be Finney for toughest outcome for me.
You surprised me with that one. I thought you were going to say Andrew Olesh drifting away from the Nittany Lions. He has placed his focus now on Michigan and Alabama. Did make it to Happy Valley here, in-state guy. But I can understand the Finney conversation because it's one that even, days before that announcement that you thought they could go 2 for 2 at McDonough, and then things changed late. But a lot more than good than bad, no doubt about it, for the Nittany Lions during the month of June. And as they exit June, what are the now established positions of strength within this recruiting class? And what are the pretty clear positions where there still needs to be work done and things accomplished in these coming months and weeks?
Cornerback looks good, even with Finney going off to Oregon. Edge looks really good for Deion Barnes at this point. He's yet to strike on the interior. And we were looking at maybe Randy Aderica going off the board over the weekend. That wound up not happening. His recruitment's rolling on into this week. Penn State looks good there, but, still got to see Miami, USC involved. So Edge looks really good. I think the offensive line's in a good place. Malachi Goodman is really just the top name left on the board for Phil Troutwine at this point. There's not a whole lot behind him. I come back to what we've been saying. Penn State's not going to reach on a guy it's not sold on. So really it's just Goodman on that O-line board right now. But the group of Alicine, Troutman, Brady O'Hara coming into that mix. I think I like some of the upside there, especially with Alcine. Wide receivers off to a solid start. Like I said, 2 more to come there if all goes well. And Exinor and Samuel, I think, are going to be good players for Penn State. Love the running back trio. Really do. Tyke Hayes, seen him in person, 7-on-7. Watching the junior season film, I mean, really, really good player. We can beat you in a ton of different ways. Jabri Wallace-Coleman, kind of the same deal. More of a power back, will beat you between the tackle, but he can catch some passes too. So there's some versatility to his game. And I'm really interested to see what Keandre Barker is as a senior now that he's back in Arkansas. So I think just go position group by position group. And I think they're good at quarterback recruits and tight end with Matt Henderson as well. So if I had to pinpoint a biggest maybe position of strength here for Penn State, I'd probably go man, it's tough because the cornerback group's really I'll probably go corner just because you got Dixon's a top 100 guy. Jameer Joseph is a top 24/7 guy who was Terry Smith's top target. He brings so much to the table from an athletic standpoint. Xavier Thomas is a prospect Penn State really likes. If I had to go another direction, it'd probably be the edge, just given who Max Granville is as a prospect. And now Jaden Woods as well. I mean, another top 24/7 edge rusher in that group who is physically already ready to contribute if he had to. And then, of course, Cortez Harris is on board as well. And Deshaun Burnett could be an edge at the next level, depending on how things play out for him. And those guys, it gives Burnett a little bit more flexibility. He could still be a linebacker at the next level, depending on how things play out. But those two are the ones really standing out to me right now.
If you're Penn State, you've got Henderson on board. We've talked about him, what he's going to do at tight end. He's played wide receiver at the high school level. He's not going to be able to enroll early in January. So he's going to campus next summer. Going to have a lot of weight to gain. Going to be going through that transition to play tight end, developmental type guy. You got a lot of clout in the recruiting world at the tight end spot. You got a lot to point to. With Olish moving elsewhere, do you see Penn State trying to flex its muscles, maybe getting a big-time name or two to campus this fall? Is this a position that they can maybe view as a high-end luxury search, or do you think that if it was just Matt Henderson and nobody else, they would be okay with that?
Well, if it's just Matt Henderson and nobody else, they would be okay with that for sure. Could they continue to look around at tight end, work that flip front? It's definitely possible, and I say that because I think they're going to do that at every position, as they do every cycle. I think Penn State's hunt for talent in the 2025 class will not come to an end until guys start signing. There's a bunch of irons in the fire, and they're definitely working on some things. But would they be okay with just Henderson? For sure. They love the upside on him, the athletic upside that he brings to the table at tight end. He might, you lay it out perfectly with him every time he comes up. He might not be as ready to contribute right away as some of the other tight ends Penn State has welcomed on the campus in recent years. But when he gets to where he needs to be in his development, Penn State is really excited about what he could bring as pass catcher.
All right, Tyler, appreciate the perspective. We're going to get to Daniel in a moment, but anything that we probably won't have you on for about a week. This will be the only episode of this particular week during the holiday time. So I want to give you a chance to set the table for us. I know you wrote something up at Lions247.com, but what are we kind of monitoring during the month of July, which is very different than how June was set up?
Really at this point, you're coming down to just commitments of key targets. More and more guys are starting to go off the board. We mentioned Samari Reed. He's going to be this week. Lex Cyrus should be soon, possibly, end of this week. Randy Adarica, we touched on him. He's coming down to it in his recruitment. Jadon Blair should be coming off the board on Friday. Top safety target for Anthony Poindexter. Notre Dame, crystal ball favorite for him right now, but Penn State gave him a lot to think about during his official visit during the last weekend of OV season. I've got to pick in for the Fighting Irish at this point. There's a lot of movement taking place on the commitment front. Rashad Johnson on July 14th, Jarquez Carter on July 18th. So really throughout the month, guys are going to be going off the board. Some of that might go Penn State's way. Some of it might go in a different direction. So definitely stay tuned for that.
And then, of course, tucked away in that last weekend of July is Lash Bash, the annual festivity here at Penn State football facilities that is always a big deal in drawing prospects from across the region, different classes represented there. That'll be in conjunction with Penn State's final prospect camp of the year. That comes the final weekend of July. But Tyler, it should be a little bit more opportunity to come up for air, catch our breath, think more big picture with some stories rather than constantly reacting to breaking news like we did throughout the month of June. So appreciate the perspective. Hope you enjoy some holiday time with you and yours. And you get great work in June. I know you're going to have it all for us at Lions 24/7 this month of July as well.
Yep. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Let's continue this episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast by bringing back on site colleague Daniel Gallen. Daniel was on with us for our last episode last week, breaking down where we think the offensive depth chart is as preseason camp is about a month away. We're going to switch perspectives now and go with the defensive side of things. Daniel, welcome back. I know you're venturing far and wide across America right now with a really cool summer trip, but I'm glad you could find a stationary spot for a bit, record this segment.
Of course, always good to get the chance to talk some Penn State. And, I've been following along from the road with what's been another busy couple of weeks for the Nittany Lions.
That's right. We got the recruiting landscape covered on our first segment of this show with Tyler Calvaruso, breaking down a really busy month of June, what we might be looking ahead to in July. But we know what's right around the corner in August, the first week of August, back on the practice fields. Penn State Nittany Lions will be working their way toward August 31st kickoff on the road in Morgantown at West Virginia. And if you missed it last Thursday, I'd encourage you to check out all of our conversation. We went position by position through the offensive side of things, working our way through competitions to know, roster risers, key returners, the newcomers. And we're going to do the same thing right now, Daniel. We're going to begin at a position that lost two high-level, talented all Big Ten players in Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac over at defensive end. As we're going to get to in a second, no one's really working their way toward the panic button right now in Happy Valley at the edge rusher spot, despite losing a first-round pick in Chop Robinson and that third-round pick in Adisa Isaac, because of some movement, because of some really big recruiting wins in the past, and then you could probably say because of a blend of rising talent and veteran presence that is probably underappreciated because of what you've got at the very top rung of the ladder here.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to not feel good about this defensive end position, which is kind of wild to say when you think about losing a first-round pick, a third-round pick, and then something I think we'll get to a little bit later is losing Zariah Fisher, a key depth piece for an unknown amount of time. I think even despite that, you look at what they've done on the recruiting trail, what Deion Barnes has done as a developer with the defensive line group, and you do feel good about what Penn State has there. And a lot of that has to do with the two headliners. You've got two juniors, two members of that class of 2022, Denai Dennis-Sutton, the former 5-star, and Abdul Carter, the all Big Ten linebacker who's making the move down. I think you start with those two guys atop your edge rusher depth chart, and it looks really, really good.
Yeah, a lot of folks will tell you, looking back at that pickup of Denai Dennis-Sutton a few cycles ago from the McDonough school. We talked about Jeff Exinor Jr. following that pipeline from McDonough for the 2025 class. But back in the 2022 cycle, when they beat out the likes of Georgia and Alabama for his commitment, we knew it was a big win. And this is kind of that moment. He's followed more of that natural progression, coming to campus, burning red shirt as a backup option. Last year, remained largely a backup, but actually played more snaps than anybody at the defensive end position when it was all said and done. Got a couple starts under his belt during the regular season when Chop Robinson was unavailable, started again in the Peach Bowl. And so before we get to Abdul Carter, who has kind of made a stunning move of sorts after having so much success at linebacker through the first half of his college career, now with Denai Dennis-Sutton, this has kind of been the path laid out. Wait your turn, do the best you can with the opportunities you're given. And there was a lot of opportunities last year. And while you do see Abdul Carter flashing on a lot of those mock drafts that we saw pop up for way too early for 2025, Denai Dennis-Sutton showed up about as much as anybody else. So we're talking about two defensive ends who have yet to really take full-fledged starting roles at this spot. And yet they are being discussed among the premier players among their peers nationally.
Yeah, and I think that you look at the physical tools that both have and what they've done on the field in their action. I think that really shows through. I mean, I'm really excited to see what Denai Dennis-Sutton can do as a starter. I know that you mentioned that, by the way that the snap counts shook out, he still played a ton of football last year. And I think that he made a really nice impact for Penn State. But I think having him on the field from the jump, I'm excited to see what that does for his production and what he's able to do, because he's 6'5", over 270 pounds, is powerful, can still move. I mean, he's a little bit of kind of a different type of edge rusher than some of the guys that Penn State has had in recent years. Someone like Odafe Owe, Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, those guys were still long, but a little bit on the slender side. I mean, I think both Chop and Adisa were under 250 pounds at times, these past couple of years. And so having that big body like Adisa Isaac, or like Nittany Sutton coming off the edge, Abdul Carter is creeping up, over 260 pounds. I mean, I think that you can have two really physically imposing guys coming off the edge, and I'm really excited to see what that does. And especially for a guy like Nittany Sutton, who was that 5-star recruit. You look at the other schools he was considering. That was such a huge win for Penn State on the recruiting trail, and then to kind of be in a little bit more of a, I don't want to call it a back seat, but not quite that prominent role over his first 2 years. I'm excited for him to get the chance to be on that national landscape and really show what he can do from that defensive end spot.
You bring up a good point about his physical makeup being a bit different. You think about Owe, Arnold Ebiketie, Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, Shaka Toney. These guys were all under 255, 260 pounds. Some of them spent a lot of their career under 250 pounds. And even from a height standpoint, I mean, we've kind of joked about it here on the podcast. They've got Denai listed at 6'5", but you get a chance to go face to face with him. It's more like face to chin for me, at least eyes to chin. This guy takes up a lot of real estate. So we've always wondered if that 6'5", 270 plus pound measurements was quite accurate, because he just seems to fill more space than that. And a lot of excitement brewing about what he can be in year 3. Again, following the stepping stones, different process for Abdul Carter. Freshman All-American at the linebacker position. He didn't start the first half of the season, but he comes on like a wrecking ball as Penn State goes on to a Rose Bowl victory. And he ends up being a 6.5 sack guy his first year on campus. Last year, it took a little more longer for those sacks to pile up. It was something that he started to do during the final stretch of the season. And quite frankly, probably took longer than we thought it would be to say Abdul Carter, took over this game defensively. Abdul Carter really swung the pendulum of this matchup. He got there, I'd say, by year's end, but he still was a first-team All-Big Ten selection at the linebacker spot, despite maybe not delivering the start-to-finish dominant year that a lot of us projected. Now we get the word in January that he has made the move to defensive end. Ultimately comes to light that he was the one spearheading this move to the edge rusher spot. You've heard from Abdul Carter. You've heard from Deion Barnes more recently, Daniel. The pieces are coming together here, as we saw in spring ball, for him to be one of the most feared, quick twitch edge presences, not just in the Big Ten, but across college football right now. And if you look at some of these mock draft projections, he's in the top half of the first round. And it's been a while. You probably have to go back to really Micah Parsons leading up to that 2020 year, where there felt like there was this much professional buzz around a defensive prospect. I know Joey Porter had first-round noise. So did Kalen King this time last year. But it's at a different wavelength right now, feels like, regarding the junior.
Definitely. I think that there's a lot of excitement from outside of Penn State about what Abdul Carter can accomplish this year, what kind of player he can be based on what he's done these past 2 years. And you look at the physical tools and you think about what the kind of the prototypical edge rusher looks like, and you can really see it. You can really visualize what Abdul Carter can be, coming off the edge. We got really good feedback on him throughout the spring. I mean, it did feel like a little bit at the beginning that James Franklin tried to slow play it a tiny bit. It's a new position, something completely different. But by the end of spring, you had James Franklin saying it went better and faster than maybe he could have ever imagined. I think Nittany Sutton was the one that said that there's one practice where Abdul Carter was just wrecking people, that he was just dominating. And then I think the one thing that you have to add to it too is what we heard about Abdul Carter on the mental side of the game. Zane Durant called him a sponge. Devon J. Thomas called him a sponge. Abdul Carter talked about, talking to Adisa Isaac and Chop Robinson to get pointers, talking to the other defensive ends in the room. And I think that was something for Deion Barnes that he was really impressed with. Barnes told me last month that he knew Abdul Carter through the recruiting process, but those first 2 years, Carter was in the linebacker room, whereas Deion Barnes was with the defensive lineman, and now being able to coach him on a daily basis in that kind of intimate way, that he's really seen the mindset for Abdul Carter, and he said that that's the reason why Abdul Carter is going to be successful. It's because he has that mindset. He wants to get better, and he's going to do anything he can to get there. So I think that when you talk about Carter making the switch, kind of the physical stuff is nice and hearing about what he's doing in practice, but I think to really solidify it and lock it in as something to be impressed about, that feedback from the meeting room, I think kind of stands out, maybe even more.
And even with these two headliners, we expect to see some rotational pieces like we did last year beyond the starting lineup to keep guys light on reps, especially as we see Penn State work its way through the first half or so of this season before things really intensify with the schedule. And the names you have to spotlight here, acknowledging, as you did earlier, that Zariah Fisher's on the shelf for a while, injured during spring ball. He's a guy who was injured a couple springs ago too. It cost him really the entire 2022 season just about. He came back for some late work. Last year was a piece that was a depth piece, but flashed. And then we heard some really good things about him during the winter, into the early spring ball, and unfortunately right now sidelined indefinitely. So with that in mind, you still got pieces to work with. Jamil Lyons, maybe about as exciting a prospect that you'll find that hasn't really gone and done it yet on this roster. A guy that we saw in glimpses last year, especially when he got some longer run in the Peach Bowl. He had a TFL in that matchup. That was really impressive, I thought. But this is the guy that a lot of people will point to in team facilities and saying, take your pick. Who's going to be a breakout contributor here in 2024? If you're talking about the defense, if you're talking about the defensive line, Jamil Lyons, the sophomore, is the name that really keeps popping up. Philadelphia edge rusher, has really come along physically. I can tell you, seeing him just around the camp circuit a little bit this summer, looks like he's about 22 years old and visiting from his new NFL draft home, the way he's put together right now. And then you got to mention Smith Filbert, who we haven't seen play regular season football since 2001. We saw him pop up for some Rose Bowl work. We saw him get 3 sacks a couple of years ago in the Outback Bowl, but those are his only 3 career sacks. He's suddenly a 6th-year senior. He's listed at about 290 pounds, and he told us he has the ability to go inside, maybe do some things as a versatile component of this defensive line group. But his name elevated a little bit with Zariah Fisher out. And then Amin Vanover. It's kind of fitting that he's the last name that I'm getting to in this, because it feels like he may be one of the more underrated pieces of this entire defensive unit. James Franklin gave him an unsolicited shout out coming out of spring camp for the work that he did, for the work that they think he's going to be due this fall. He had a big blue-white game for himself, so put some of that on public display. But again, the two guys are the headliners. They're going to command a lot of interest from people at the national level. But those of us who have followed this team locally, those of you who have listened consistently, you know full well that Deion Barnes can go down the depth chart a bit at defensive end. There's 5 guys without even getting to a Jalen Harvey, who's a true freshman. Jordan Mayer, who I think is a compelling piece that they brought in from a transfer at Wisconsin. Going to be more of a piece for you on scout team probably here in 2024. But even with Zariah Fisher out of the equation and 2 NFL rookies now out of the way, feels like they've got the goods, not just to rely on those top 2, but to really be able to work their way down the depth chart, to keep this rotation fresh. And then you're attacking offensive tackles with a full game of work underneath their legs in the late stages of the fourth quarter with guys who've maybe played 25, 30 reps to that point.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's clear, even at this point in the year, is that those guys, the number 3, 4, 5, whatever combination of Lyons, Vilbert, Vanover, that is, maybe some of the redshirt freshmen get the chance to jump up, is that those guys are going to play. Deion Barnes said that he wants to rotate them. We've seen that the past couple of years, even when John Scott was the defensive line coach, that you want to get fresh bodies in there on the edge, really all over the defensive line to get after those offensive linemen, especially in the later stages of the game, keep your guys fresh. And so I think between Lyons, Vanover, and Vilbert, you have a really kind of compelling trio there. You've got guys who are at, very different stages of their career with different experiences, who can all do kind of a little bit different things. I think that Lions is kind of that stereotypical long edge rusher, kind of the guy that when you look at the NFL that you're kind of like, that's the prototype.
Explosion from him. Yeah,
exactly. Vanover is someone who played on the interior a little bit more earlier in his career. And I think that he's listed in the 260s for his weight. And so he's a little bit more stouter, but we've seen some good things from him. And then, Vilbert is a little bit of a wild card this year, in terms of what we're going to see him do, how much we're going to see him. I think it's interesting that he's cross-trained at both the defensive tackle spot and the defensive end spot. 6'6", just former basketball player, such a long guy. I think I'm really curious to see what that looks like at defensive tackle. Maybe we'll see from him what we thought we might have seen from Davon Townley when he made that move to defensive tackle when he came back from the portal, but never really materialized. But Deion Barnes, when I talked to him last month, was really excited about Vilbert. He said that he wasn't going to put a number on what Vilbert was going to do, but he said that when 92's on the field, you're going to notice him. So we'll see. He hasn't played consistent football since 2021. Last time we really saw him was in that Outback Bowl. And people can discuss those sacks however they want, but he was around the quarterback. So we'll see what this looks like. But I think even without Zariah Fisher, I think that those next three guys it's an exciting, interesting group, and I think that Lions is someone who going into next year could be, because theoretically this group could lose a lot to the draft and eligibility stuff. I think Lions is in a really nice position to going into next year being a guy at defensive end.
Yeah, Lions is on a trajectory right now where it wouldn't surprise if you see this team regroup for spring ball 2025, and he's one of those faces of the defense kind of figures. If it goes according to plan for him, he's got a lot to do on the field between now and then, but that's kind of the feedback. I'm glad you mentioned the redshirt freshman because I skipped right over them and brought up Jalen Harvey, who's the only true freshman defensive end on this roster right now. You had Joseph Mpoye, Mason Robinson making their move to campus last year. They took a red shirt. Neither of them saw game action. And quite frankly, with the way things are set up right now at defensive end, going to be an uphill climb for them to really get involved as contributors come Saturdays in year two. Year six guy in Smith Vilbert, you've got a couple year six guys in the defensive tackle room, a couple guys opting in with that COVID eligibility, and Hakeem Beamon and Devon. You know him as Devon Elise. I'm going to introduce him that way. But as Daniel referenced earlier and kind of saying a commentary about Dennis Sutton that he got from Devon, his name is now Devon J. Thomas. That was announced to us, I think, last week. So it's officially changed on the roster. So if you hear Devon J. Thomas on this show moving forward, we're talking about the man you've previously known as Devon Elise, who is a sixth-year senior at the defensive tackle spot. And he's a guy that I think, when we talk about six-year players, often you think you have them figured out. But what we saw from Jay Thomas during the second half of the 2023 season was clearly the best football of his career. I thought he was outstanding in the Peach Bowl when we were kind of looking for bright spots. I thought he was one, and I thought maybe that was going to be his farewell moment. Instead, he announces he's sticking around. He's going to be a really important guy, could be a team captain for this team. But when looking at his ascension next to Zane Durant last year, it kind of came at the expense of Hakeem Beamon, who finished the year as a backup after serving as a starter for much of the early portions of the season, or at least rotating with Devon in that role. And so you got two guys coming from different 2023 experiences. I think Devon J. Thomas is riding a bit of a high right now, trying to maintain that momentum, help his own professional stock, really be a tone setter for this team inside, along with Zane Durant. Then you've got Hakeem Beamon, who I know is on the record as saying he was not pleased with how his fifth year on campus went. And it feels like he's somebody forever has been on the fringe of being a breakout player. Penn State doesn't necessarily need that from him this year, but getting the best version of Hakeem Beamon and fortifying what you've got in the defensive tackle depth chart, which only lost a couple guys. Jordan Vandenberg transferred out to Georgia Tech. Devon Townley transferred out after initially entering the portal last offseason. Other than that, you've got your gang back together. You've got Alonzo Ford back from injury, a guy you added from Old Dominion last year, and you've got a four-man freshman class to work through, and you might have some Smith Vilbert involved. So what I'm saying here again is they're in a really good spot from a depth perspective. I know I threw a lot of names your way there, but I think that's kind of the story here on defensive tackle. You can take a lot of time working your way through the group.
Yeah, I think that the one place I'm going to start at defensive tackle is with Zane Durant, who I think in that class of 2022 has, over these past 3 years, has maybe been one of the more consistent contributors going back to what he did as a freshman. And now I think he's been a little bit more under the radar. I think that part of that is the position. You don't get a lot of big sack numbers coming from the interior, those sorts of things. But, I think that the way that he's developed physically since he got here, I think he was at 255 or 265 on signing day. He's up to near 290 now. You see him at camp, and he is just a very, very just built defensive tackle. And I think that we've seen that he hasn't sacrificed any explosiveness over these past couple of years when he's been on the field. And so I think that Zane Durant is someone who is, very well positioned to have a really solid year. I like what I've seen with him. And then you pair him with Devon J. Thomas, who came on so strong at the end of last year. I asked Deion Barnes if that second half was the best football of his career, and Deion Barnes agreed. And Barnes said that the next thing for Devon is, and he had said he had just had a conversation with him that morning to remind him, is that you have to do everything that you did at the end of last year to continue to be that successful. And that's not easy, but that's what you need to do. I think that, Devon kind of knows now how to get to that point. And so I'm really excited to see if he can really spin that forward. But there is so much experience in this group. You think about how much Hakeem Beamon has played, how much Keziah Izzard has played, dating back to his redshirt freshman season in 2021. That's someone who has done a lot of different things for this group. And then after that, I'm really curious how it shakes out, because we know that Deion Barnes wants to rotate, and we've seen them go pretty much 5 deep at defensive end these past couple of years, and we've seen them try to go 5 or 6 deep at defensive tackle. And so who is going to be the guy that really steps up there? Can Alonzo Ford, will we finally see him on the field, and will he be able to rotate? Caleb Artis and Ty Blanding are 2 guys who've been in the program for a little bit and are physically developing. And then, there's 4 freshmen. I'm excited to see them on the field in August. Some of them were sidelined with injury stuff in the spring, and, our glimpses were pretty short, but I think that if maybe one of those guys can be, in the rotation, maybe all of them get up to that 4-game threshold. So you see what you have. I think that there's some really exciting pieces there to work with, especially when you kind of project everything forward and you have 2 6-year guys in this group. Which other guys are going to move on? We'll have to wait and see in terms of eligibility and things like that. But it's a very intriguing group from top to bottom, with a bunch of veterans, a bunch of young guys, a lot of guys in the middle, and it seems like it can be a really successful group.
4 guys with starting experience in Durant and Devon J. Thomas and Hakeem Beamon and Keziah Izzard. Let's remember, Izzard stepped up a few years back as a younger player when PJ Mustipher was sidelined for much of that season in 2021. So he's seen a lot of football as well. He's a name that you may forget just because there are a lot to get to here. And as you said, Ty Blanding up to about 285 pounds now in his second year. And then Caleb Artis, one of the bigger presences in that defensive tackle room for the last couple of years, now a redshirt sophomore at about 323 pounds. And you mentioned Alonzo Ford. He's been sidelined since last preseason camp after making his transfer from Old Dominion. A lot of rust to knock off, but what we heard coming out of spring camp was that there was a lot of optimism that he would be able to get back into the swing of things with practice come preseason ball. So we'll see what he can do. I think you kind of slot Alonzo Ford with those 4 freshmen and saying, we'll see. We'll be keeping tabs because a couple of those freshmen couldn't really go this spring. We didn't get long looks at him. A guy like Liam Andrews, very highly rated. What does he look like on the field with Power 4 competition? The one guy I'll note that we've consistently gotten really strong feedback on his conditioning, on his strength, and just on the work he's put together since arriving on campus is January enrollee Xavier Gilliam. He's the one guy that just consistently hear about putting it together well for himself physically and mentally early on. Going to the second level of this defense, the linebacker conversation adjusts a bit here in 2024. And we'll get to exactly why with that new line position in just a moment. But it sure does seem like we're fixated on a pair above all the rest at linebacker, with Kobe King, a full year as the starting Mike linebacker under his belt, and then Tony Rojas, who burned red shirt last year. When he got run, it was usually pretty impressive. That extended all the way through the Peach Bowl in Atlanta. And the buzz has been in place for him since last winter, carried over through now. And right now, it just feels like if there's one guy on this roster, especially on the defensive side of the ball, who's just primed to launch, and by the time we get through, let's say, the first 3-4 games of this year, is going to be a household name for Nittany Lions fan, I'm putting my money on Tony Rojas. And I think that's where the conversation starts, because we're going to see a lot of two linebacker looks. And I think when games are hanging in the balance and when things are early on in this season, as they try to get other guys comfortable, we're going to see extended use of both King and Rojas in tandem.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where you have to start at linebacker with those two. I think that we saw Kobe King last year really establish himself as that Mike in the middle, that voice in the middle of the defense. And I thought that he had a very solid year. And he's going to be a redshirt junior this year, and year 4, I think that he has the chance to take a leap. I'm curious to see what's a little bit different for him and pretty much for everyone in the Tom Allen defense. It's a little bit of a change of pace. But yeah, I think that the arrow is really pointing up for Tony Rojas. I think that when we've heard the feedback about the linebackers, it really is kind of Tony Rojas as the headliner. That's the one who keeps coming up. We've seen him really transform his body. I think he's up close to 240 pounds now in the latest roster update. And I think that coming in, we really saw him as, I think, kind of a Sam based on his background and ability to play in space, was a high school running back at Fairfax in Northern Virginia. But I think that he's really put himself in a position to play in the box and to really mix it up physically. By all accounts, he hasn't sacrificed any of that speed and athleticism that made him such a highly sought after prospect in the class of 2023. But I think that he's in a position to be in the box, to really mix it up next to Kobe King. And I think he could have a really, really nice year.
Dominic DeLuca not going anywhere, likely to be a special teams captain for the second consecutive year. Played a lot of defensive football the last couple of years with Manny Diaz. A lot of it did come in that Sam role, which is where we saw Curtis Jacobs start, and which is kind of where we're going to see the line position, I think, take over for a lot of these matchups. But let's remember, you're going to have games where the offense is going to be making a concerted effort to establish itself on the ground. It's going to try to win by going after you down the middle. And so this isn't a Penn State defense that's just going to be, here's the 11 that we put out as our starting lineup every week, and we're going to play these guys 75% of the game. There's always going to be different wrinkles to this. We knew that with Manny Diaz, especially as we got used to how many guys were involved on a week-to-week basis. And I think with Tom Allen, something that's key to remember here is some games you'll see a lot of two linebackers. Other games you'll see more of a traditional 3 linebacker look. And so guys like Dominic DeLuca, Tyler Elsdon has starting experience at Mike linebacker. But I think a lot of the focus for me at linebacker, because Keon Wiley is now out of the equation, at least for the time being. He's another guy that during spring ball, coming off a strong offseason, trying to build off of that, suffered a setback, suffered an injury, and as we confirmed back in May, out for a significant portion of time. So we'll see if he's available for this team coming out of fall camp and what that might mean. But with Keon Wiley's sideline, a lot of focus goes on the other 2 2023 signees, Daniel. Yes, you had Tony Rojas burn red shirt from that group, but you also had Tamir Robinson and Kavion Keys really turning heads on the scout team last year. Keys was actually picked as the developmental squad player of the year on both defense and on special teams. Then you had Robinson becoming a little bit of a buzzier name during spring ball with some of the stuff he was doing, and some of the coaching staff feedback on Robinson was really glowing as we worked our way through April. So these guys are on the rise. I know we're used to names like Elsdon and DeLuca at this point, but it's going to be fun to see what exactly happens when we get to the third possession of this West Virginia game. Are we getting to some different looks? Where is Tom Allen turning towards, and how much are Kavion Keys and Tamir Robinson a part of that plan?
all three of these linebackers from the 23 class have all kind of had their turn as being the really buzzy name. I mean, for Tony Rojas, it really hasn't stopped, but he was the one from day one. And then at the end of last year, it's Kavion Keys, getting those D squad recognition, and Curtis Jacobs had some really, really good things to say about him. And then this spring was Tamir Robinson's turn. I think that Robinson is a really interesting prospect given just his physical makeup, just how long he is, and he's put on some weight too. And I think he can be a pretty imposing presence back there in the middle of that defense. And so, I think that Keys and Robinson, I want to see them on the field more. I'm really curious to see what they look like. But I think that you talk about the depth that Penn State has built up at linebacker. I think that you look at those second-year guys as, who can potentially break through. They're going to push Tyler Elsdon and Dominic DeLuca. More competition in the room is always good. And we'll see what this actually looks like, what kind of rotations there are, what kind of different packages there are, how Tom Allen approaches getting different guys on the field in different situations, which is something we saw Manny Diaz, do a pretty good job of the past 2 years. And so I think that Robinson and Keys are definitely in position to make some sort of leap in year 2.
And with Kobe King as a redshirt junior, a guy who I think played a far better football than people even realized last year, was really such a key piece of why this defense was so strong and consistent throughout the regular season. He's going to take another step forward this year. He's a redshirt junior. And regardless of what awaits in 2025, I think it's going to be very beneficial to have Tamir Robinson kind of waiting in the wings, attached to the hip, I would hope, with Kobe King, and learning the ins and outs of what life is like as a Mike linebacker here at Penn State, not just what's expected of you on Saturday for those 3 hours of football game action, but what is required from when you get back into facilities on Sunday morning all the way through game prep going into the next Saturday morning, because I think Kobe King has really been lauded for what he has done in that regard. And so if Tamir Robinson is going to take that next step and become maybe the next Mike linebacker for this team down the road, I think it's a really good thing to be able to follow in that path for at least another year with Kobe King right by his side. Two-man linebacker class from a freshman standpoint. Kari Jackson came to campus in January. He was able to get a bunch of practices in. That's great because when he was a high school senior, he missed most of his year with an injury. He's a guy who has some history on the defensive line earlier in his career. He's not afraid to get rough, physical. He's going to be a box presence. Same goes for Anthony Specca, who's probably come about as far as anyone that we've seen compared to where they were last summer as prospects before their high school senior year. Guy that's really filled out physically. I know strength coach Chuck Losey has been really impressed by what they got from Anthony Specca when he got to campus in May, and his preparedness to compete at this level. We'll see if that can carry through his first Power 4 practice sessions. So from linebacker to kind of bridging the gap toward the secondary, now we go to the line position. And this is in a lot of ways going to be familiar to what we knew from Penn State implementing its nickel position. A lot of 5 defensive back looks over the years. We saw it under Manny Diaz. We saw it before him. Daquan Hardy was routinely that third cornerback in the mix. But the Lion spot has been routinely described as a lot of safety traits involved there. You want to be able to cover in space, but also bring that physicality and some size to the role. And thus far, what we've heard consistently, whether it's Tom Allen, Anthony Poindexter on the staff, teammates, people involved in this competition, that Jalen Reed has separated himself at this particular spot. And we'll talk about what that means for safety, because he was a starting safety in 2023. But now, by extension, going on to play the line role, something we saw him do in the blue-white game. Going to see a lot of that this autumn. And there are some interesting names here, Daniel, because Terry Smith gave us a nugget in June when discussing this, that on third downs, when it's super obvious that they're looking at passing situations and they got to prepare for that, he's pretty confident this role is going to come from his room at cornerback. And the name that really surfaces there most routinely is Cam Miller, though you've also got Zion Tracy in the mix there. And a couple other guys here that have not played a bunch defensively for Penn State over the years, but are in the thick of this thing. Tyrese Mills, who's been a bit of a tweener between safety and linebacker since coming to campus from Lackawanna College. He dealt with an injury in his first year. And then Colin Dinkins is really the rising name in this conversation based on feedback from Terry Smith. He's technically transitioned from cornerback to safety on the roster working toward the 2024 season, but Lion is the spot you want to see him. According to Smith, he is legitimately pushing for this number 2 job. He's the younger brother of Khalil Dinkins, who's a tight end for the squad, but as a redshirt sophomore, someone who joined the team as a walk-on, Colin Dinkins is the name, I think, that we all need to be tracking here beyond Jalen Reed, because I thought he did some really good things in the blue-white game. And when you've got one of the most esteemed coaches on this staff telling you he's going to be a playable guy, and we're this close to the season, you're going to pay attention. So it starts with Jalen Reed, but you work your way and you kind of go cornerback, safety, a little bit of linebacker flair in there as well. And you add it up to just kind of wonder, what buttons does Tom Allen want to press, and is he going to press them at the right time, because he's got the resources of likes that he has never had in this position calling a defense.
Yeah, this is one of the spots where I think you're really going to see the kind of the full depth of this safety room, of this cornerback room on display, and all the talent that's been stockpiled there. I think that you can really, this is where the mixing and matching comes in, and the ability to use different guys in different spots. I do think that Jalen Reed is really suited to that spot. We've heard really good things about him from the mental side, as the type of processor that he is. And so I think having him up closer to the line of scrimmage on early downs should help put him in a position to succeed, and maybe help this defense succeed. I am interested to see what it looks like in terms of third down, when that is kind of that more traditional cornerback nickel. Daquan Hardy, it feels like he was doing it for forever. And we saw a little bit of Johnny Dixon in there, but for the most part, it was Hardy. And so who can step up there? I do like what Cam Miller brings to the table. We heard a little bit about AJ Harris, the Georgia transfer, in there, in addition to Zion Tracy. But to go back to one last point with Colin Dinkins, I thought he had a really nice blue-white game. And even going through last year, he's someone who stood out on special teams. He was on some of the coverage units, and just looking at the cornerback group as it went through, drills and in practice and before games, he just really stood out physically. He's listed at 6'2", around 200 pounds. Joey Porter Jr. Was maybe the last big body that Penn State had in that cornerback group. Last year wasn't necessarily as big. And so he was someone that kind of your eye got drawn to a little bit. And he made a couple plays on special teams. I think he also got dinged for a couple penalties here and there. But I am really intrigued by him after the blue-white game with the switch to safety. How can he be used? How can he get on the field? And what can he bring that's unique?
Let's go over to safety, because it just feels like they're very much tethered between these two positions in the way we're talking about Jalen Reed. And part of the confidence in being able to say, well, Jalen Reed is going to go to this new role despite flourishing in a different kind of setting last year is the fact that this safety spot has 3 studs, in the opinion of this coaching staff. And they got Zakee Wheatley and KJ Winston to hold things down back deep, while Jalen Reed navigates the new role at Lion. And I think the key to all this is Zakee Wheatley's year for putting it together. I think the phrase that we got from James Franklin was the lights came on. We've heard that at different points about different guys. When he puts that out there, you pay attention. And it was through winter ball that we were hearing really good things about Zakee Wheatley. And then he put together a complete performance during spring practices. And right now you feel really good about saying he's going to be one of the most active members of this Penn State defense, despite times last year where his usage was slipping, where he was clearly a backup, and at times wasn't as much of a factor as maybe we anticipated in his third year on campus. So for Zakee Wheatley, who started his career at cornerback, had kind of this mythological stretch where he was the takeaway king in spring camp and preseason camp, it feels like playing alongside KJ Winston, who some are projecting as a first-round pick, and sharing the field with Jalen Reed, who has as much experience as any defensive player on this roster. He is really an X factor for what they're going to be able to do and how they might be able to stretch their talent across an 11-man look.
Definitely. It sounds like the messaging to Zakee Wheatley is that they're going to need him this year, and that they're going to need him to play at a high level. I think the idea of having Jalen Reed up close to the line of scrimmage, and then KJ Winston and Zakee Wheatley, kind of patrolling the deeper areas of the field. I mean, it's hard to think of a better situation almost than with those 3 guys, if they're all operating at their highest level. But that can be a pretty big if sometimes. So I'm excited to see what this looks like. I think that you've recruited well there. Even with King Mack leaving, I think there's still some depth and still some talent. But Wheatley's going to be a big part of it. I mean, if he can kind of, man that deep part of the field, be that ball hawk, be around the ball, at all times, I think that can do a lot for the Nittany Lions and everyone that's in front of that safety group.
Winston is someone who we've talked about having All-American potential since he really got to campus. There's always been a buzz around this guy. He's understated himself, but people do the talking for KJ Winston, and it really seems like now year 3, maybe ready to fulfill a lot of that after a really strong sophomore campaign. And you look beyond that leading trio, and by the way, good chance that if things go well for them on the field, all 3 of these guys are in NFL uniforms come 2025. We don't know that yet, but you got to brace for it if you're Penn State. And so you look beyond what's happening there, and you factor in that you lost the top 100 overall recruit in King Mack after his freshman season because of his transfer to Alabama after spring ball. So that 4th safety spot gets a lot more interesting. You could probably say the 5th one does too. Lamont Payne made the move from cornerback to safety. We've seen that work out for a bunch of guys in the past. Zakee Wheatley, Keaton Ellis. It is something that we've seen with consistency. And now Payne getting early feedback that's been really positive for what he's done at safety, how his body type matches that better than what he was going to bring to the cornerback. He's a long defensive back. And then DeJuan Lane recently got to campus. He followed up Vabu Torre, who was on campus in January, put together a pretty strong spring practice period. I thought he held up well playing with the varsity squad, the team white during the spring game. And then we've also got to include Dakari Nelson, who is still a little tricky to kind of figure out exactly how he fits at 6'3", 220 pounds, someone we've been pretty enamored with since he came to town as a top 24/7 talent, knowing full well that body type is just unique in all sorts of ways. He's stuck at safety. Can he make that move? Can he be an ascending figure in that room? Right now, I think it's too early to tell. Something that we'll probably check back in, after the first couple of weeks of August, and we're generating some traction toward that opener against West Virginia. But much like running back 3 competition, as we discussed on offense, not only are you trying to find the right depth pieces for this year, but you may be trying to find your next starters and your next stalwarts for 2025.
Yeah, I think you look at this group of young guys, and I think Penn State has done a nice job of, mixing and matching different skill sets. Lamont Payne had really good reviews when he came in. And then between the group of Dakari Nelson, Vabu Torre, and DeJuan Lane, I mean, you've got some really physically imposing guys there. Nelson at 6'3", Lane at 6'2", Torre at 6'1", 212 pounds. I think was Alan Zamitis called him the hacksaw for the type of hits that he can put on guys. I think that Penn State has really given Anthony Poindexter has gone out and got a lot of different body types and a lot of different guys who can do different things on the back end. And knowing that Penn State is willing to move their defensive backs between safety and cornerback and safety to figure out where the best fit is, I think that helps a lot too in the defensive backfield. But I think that as we look forward to 2025, I think we've talked about a couple different positions this year, running back, defensive end, and now safety, where there can be there's the potential for a lot of turnover. Things can look a lot different. And so, for these young guys who we might not see much on Saturdays, it's still a really important, really valuable year for them.
And I think special teams is where you're going to see these names also surface like we did last year. Guys that didn't really make an impact on defense, like Zion Tracy and Elliott Washington, kind of quietly burned their red shirt because of the work they did on special teams and coverage roles. And let's finish out here with cornerback. And you'd think, oh boy, this is going to be a problem this year. You lost your top 3 contributors. And I know it turned out differently in the NFL draft for some of these guys than we thought, but Kalen King, Johnny Dixon, and Daquan Hardy were each all-conference picks in 2023, and they all had different skill sets, perimeter, inside. They had it covered for the last couple of years, really, that trio. And now they've all moved on, and yet here we are not really worrying about this spot because Terry Smith certainly isn't worrying about it. He has said multiple times this year, coming out of spring camp, now approaching summer ball, that he believes this cornerback unit could be the deepest he's had. And this is year 11 for him in Happy Valley. He's been with James Franklin every step of the way as an original member of this staff, and he's dealt with turnover in the past. I think he's really glad to have Cam Miller, who we just talked a lot about, maybe stepping up in that line role, especially on third down scenarios. But Cam Miller has played a bunch as a backup piece the last couple of years. Not a ton of use in the slot. I think you could see more of that from him, more outside by far during his first couple of years on campus. But he's a former top 24/7 player, has really filled out for himself physically. I think he's around 185 now. And right now, what you continue to hear about him is just a different kind of leader than they've had in this cornerback room. No disrespect to the people that have been there in recent years and had success there, but he's just a different kind of leadership presence in the way he kind of sets the tone for everybody. So to have that, Daniel, when you're going through all the other different turnover, where you've got A.J. Harris coming up from Georgia after his first season with the Bulldogs, former 5-star prospect, Jalen Kimber coming up after starting last year with the Florida Gators. He also previously was with the Georgia Bulldogs. He's a former top 100 prospect. And then, oh, by the way, you move Lamont Wade over to safety, and you bring in a couple of three freshmen, I should say. So when there's a lot of things moving, I think Cam Miller has been a kind of consistency that they needed in this room. And then around him, I think there's just a lot of fun pieces, whether it's, instant impact transfer players or second-year guys making their run, or a transfer player from last year, Davion Collins, who has been pushing and pushing and pushing. And so a little bit like defensive end, where you've got all these different guys from different kind of journeys to get to this point, and yet they're sharing this room, and it's all lending you the confidence that Penn State's going to be okay at cornerback.
Yeah, I think that's the big conclusion you can take away from this, is that the talent is there. It's just kind of a question of how it shakes out. And you look at all the players in this group, and they all kind of occupy different, I don't know, like if superlative is the right word for it, where Cam Miller is the returner who's gotten the leadership praise. Davion Collins was maybe the breakout performer of the spring. AJ Harris is the very highly regarded transfer. Jalen Kimber is the super experienced transfer. And then you've got Elliott Washington and Zion Tracy, two guys that got their feet wet last year, got some valuable experience, especially in the Peach Bowl, and they're in a position to potentially move up, make a run at things. I think that this is a group where, coming out of the blue-white game, you maybe have kind of the least feel for how the depth chart might look, because AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber were on that blue team, whereas most of the returners were on the white team, getting extensive run. And so, I think that, we've seen when Kalen King was a freshman, we saw him get the chance to rotate in at different points. We saw Johnny Dixon get the chance to rotate in at different points in 2022 on the outside. And so I think that Terry Smith has shown that he's going to put guys on the field, if they deserve it. And they're going to have they have the chance to have a lot of deserving guys this year. So I'm really curious to see how it shakes out. I think that going through doing this depth chart exercise, this was maybe the hardest one for me to pick, like the 2 starters or the 3 starters. But I think that you can really put your trust in Terry Smith and, trust him to put different combinations out there that can get the job done.
It is tough. I think it's hard not to just say or when you look at these starting jobs. Davion Collins or A.J. Harris or Cam Miller or Jalen Kimber. And you don't want to sleep on Zion Tracy or Elliott Washington, who both were able to get some work in their first years and have tried to build off that in year 2 and have special prospect pedigrees of their own. And then you bring in 3 freshmen, 2 of which were here in January, Antoine Belgrave-Shorter and John Mitchell. Kenny Wosley comes to town in June from Philadelphia. He's a guy that they really think could do good things for them in slot coverage down the road. And we've seen freshmen show up at this position and get run on special teams, at cornerback, maybe later in games. So don't sleep on those newcomers at all. But it feels like Terry Smith legitimately will be considering 6 guys to potentially start for Penn State. I have a hard time shaking off what we witnessed from A.J. Harris playing for an overmatched Team Blue during the blue-white game. It really lined up with so much of what we heard of his performance during spring practices. But I'm also really clinging to what Terry Smith told us about Jalen Kimber. There have been some criticism of how Kimber performed last year. There was a lot of criticism about how the Florida Gators defense performed at large, so it's hard to separate those two factors. One thing that Terry Smith told us about Jalen Kimber during a meeting with the media in June is that they think they'll be better set up to motivate him. And they also believe that Jalen Kimber is tougher than they expected. He's a guy that is really further along with how they want to run their practices, with how they want their cornerback culture. I think he meshed with that more than they thought he might off the bat. And so that's given him a nice jump toward pushing for a starting role too. So a lot to work with for Terry Smith. We didn't promise we'd give you a complete depth chart and tell you who all the stars would be. But really, when it comes to it, Daniel, I think the prevailing theme on defense, and it's not all that different than the conversations we had leading up to the 2023 season and when Manny Diaz was defensive coordinator, is it doesn't necessarily matter who is starting a lot of the time. It matters who are the 20 to 25 players that are playing consistently. I don't know if that number comes down a bit with Tom Allen, but I do think that it's best not to be bogged down by who's actually out there for the initial reps in Morgantown on August 31st, because you are going to see this staff wheeling and dealing with the pieces they have. And I think really some specialized weapons that they'll be able to carve out between now and the end of preseason camp.
Definitely. I think that this defense is just very, very well stocked. You look at how they've recruited the past couple of years, the types of prospects they've been in, and then the development that's happened once guys have gotten here. I think that, you can look back at guys who were on the roster in 2021 who grew into bigger contributors by 2023. I mean, Johnny Dixon stands out as a prime example of the development that can happen at Penn State. And so, I'm excited to see what this looks like. I think that the snap counts at the end of games might be a little bit more telling than starting lineups. And then also who's on the field in the fourth quarter in crunch time, what that looks like. But I think that Penn State is well positioned to have the right guys for the right spots this fall on the defensive side of the ball.
And they're well positioned to not have to rely upon the same 11 in a 3rd and 15 scenario as they are in a 1st and goal scenario. They've got the goods to be able to mix and match and really figure out what they want to set on the field depending on what circumstances are dictating. Good stuff as always, Daniel. We're a month out from seeing this team on the field, preseason camp work. If you missed our conversation last Thursday, go check it out. We spent about 45 minutes breaking down the offensive depth chart, the storylines and competitions from position to position. Daniel, good stuff as always. Enjoyed it. We'll talk to you real soon.
Appreciate it, Tyler.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast. Before Daniel, we broke down the latest in Nittany Lions recruiting with Tyler Calvaruso. We will come back to you with a fresh episode at the start of next week. That's going to do it for this week, though. We hope you all enjoy your holiday. We're going to do our best to do that here. For now, stepping aside, I am Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.